The Unmarked by Matt Fleagle. Chapter 13. The Indestructible Weapon. In one corner of the large atrium below them were 3 holding cells, each built of thick iron. Within one of these cages lay Teva, curled up at the far edge of her cell. Next to her was Grimwet, pacing from one end of his cell to the other. Low growls rumbled from his hulking body as he lumbered to and fro within the cage. On the other side of the cavernous chamber was Madge, tied up with thin ropes and seated on a large stool. Though unbound, Glista stood near Madge, flanked by 2 brawny scouts on either side. Kaleb guessed the scouts were posted there to restrain Glista in case she tried to escape or harm her captors. Kaleb surveyed the room, studying the other characters below him. He needed no help from Freylin to identify Verlisden. The woman's statuesque figure was unmistakable. Strikingly beautiful by any measure, Verlisden's face boasted a chiseled, gleaming perfection. When she moved, however, her swagger and stiffness somehow spoiled her beauty. Verlisden stood near the middle of the chamber, in long robes that draped over her slender but powerful shoulders and outlined her athletic figure. She wore a uniform, much like her scouts, only decorated with small jewels that gleamed purple and red in the flickering firelight. Her boots and outer robes were regal, but the garments underneath pressed tightly against her to provide mobility to her arms and her legs. She seemed ready to mingle with foreign dignitaries or to duel a fierce enemy at any moment. Verlisden's hair, black as midnight, was long like Glista's, only she had tied it up in a bun above her head to reveal the black stone-render mark at the base of her neck. Her eyes were like 2 glistening pieces of perfectly rounded coal, her lips dark as aged wine. Verlisden was conversing with 2 scouts in the center of the chamber. One of these stone-renders Kaleb recognized as Bliston, the deep-voiced scout who had kidnapped Grimwet and Glista. It took another minute for Kaleb to recognize the other scout. His back was turned on the balcony, but his voice proved to be that of Elslin. When Elslin edged around the table below, Kaleb could see that his face was scarred and angular. Though shorter than Bliston and Verlisden, he was no less powerful in muscle or build. "Were there no others with my prodigal daughter?" said Verlisden. "Are you absolutely sure, Bliston?" When she spoke, her voice commanded attention, much like Glista's, only without the twinge of compassion and humanity beneath Glista's stern tone. "We cannot be sure, Commander," Bliston said. "We think the others escaped. There can't have been many. We fell upon them from the trees as you instructed us." "It matters not if there were many or few when you came upon the intruders," said Verlisden. "What matters is that they ventured into our woods. They're certainly after the branch." With this, her eyes flitted over to a table near the room's massive hearth, where the branch from the sacred tree had been laid out on a purple swath of fine cloth stretching across the table's surface. "Begging your pardon, I don't see how that branch serves us at all," Bliston said. "Elslin risked his life to get it, and for what? To stir up the Dellbloods against us. I wouldn't be surprised if those club-wielding farmers staged a siege of our city before the week is out. It seems like you're only inciting a war, Verlisden." Verlisden crossed the chamber to where the severed branch lay out on the table. Removing a black glove from her hand, she reached out and ran her pale fingers along the smooth exterior of the branch. "The Dellblood's trees are known for their long-burning flame," she intoned quietly. "But the Dellbloods are ignorant of the immense power that lies dormant within their sacred tree. The superstitious fools would never lay an axe upon it, so they have no idea its timber can be put to great use, if placed in capable hands." With this, she took a thick cord from somewhere within her cloak and laced it around the branch several times over. Then, sliding her sword out of its scabbard at her side, Verlisden laid the weapon on top of the severed branch and proceeded to lace the sword and branch together. As she laced the two objects together, Verliston hummed softly to herself. Glista and Madge looked on helplessly, with concern shining in their eyes. When Verliston had nearly completed her work, she laid her modified weapon on the table for a moment. Then she said to no one in particular, "For centuries, stone-renders have believed that our great stone and the Dellblood sacred tree were placed among us as a divine protection from outside forces. Neither we nor they are strong, plentiful in numbers, or capital to shield us against threat from the north. It was thought that these tokens of the forest spirit's providence had kept us secure from the invasion of nations to our south and far to the east." She turned toward her fellow scouts and continued, "But I have come to learn something quite different. I now believe these myths, planted among us by the forest spirit and our spineless ancestors, conceal a wonderful secret." "What secret?" said Elslin. Verliston looked him squarely in the eyes and smiled. "Inside the sacred objects is magic, and with it, long-neglected powers ripe for the taking. The Dellblood's council and the Stone-render elders are too cowed by superstition to dare explore the potential in our sacred objects. Yet even a fragment of the sacred tree," she continued, picking up the branch and sword and inspecting it as she revolved it slowly in the air, "could be deployed as an unstoppable weapon against any enemy." Bliston and Elslin watched her curiously. Even Grimwit quit his pacing to inspect Verliston through the bars of his iron cage. Teva rose from the floor of her cell and trained her wide blue eyes on the woman who held the strange weapon within her hands. "Why should we not harness this power, and by it secure a brighter future for our people?" Verliston continued. "I would never, you must understand, strike terror into the stone-renders by damaging our great stone. But what is it to me if the Dellbloods weep over their tree?" Here Verliston turned toward Madge. After gazing at her captive for a few moments, the black-clad woman strode up to the girl. Madge's widened eyes were fixed on the edge of Verliston's ornate blade. Verliston leaned in and almost purred into the girl's ear. "Your make people, my beautiful captive, have no weapons. What good is your abundance of lush land and long-burning trees without anything to defend them?" Verliston pressed her strong, spindly fingers delicately against Madge's mouth. Madge shuddered, but did not break her stare into Verliston's cruel eyes. "My people," she went on, "have been forced to barter with yours for produce and timber since I've been alive, like beggars with no food of our own. Well, in a matter of days, my scouts and I will destroy your people's village. We'll burn it to the ground, and we'll seize your forests and your fields for our own people." As she said this, Verliston's hand slid from underneath Madge's mouth and toward the back of her neck. With a quick movement, the towering woman swept up the girl's long blonde hair in her hand and yanked it up above her head. Madge's chin was angled toward the ceiling, her neck exposed. Kaleb watched in horror from the balcony. Madge was shaking with stifled sobs, but she did not scream or protest. "Begging your pardon, Verliston," interrupted Elslin, who cleared his throat from the center of the room. "But how do you expect to pull off a mission of such magnitude? The Dellbloods are admittedly unprepared for battle, but they will no doubt fight back tooth and nail to save their homes. When cornered, their elders will organize a resistance, marshal the Dellbloods against your small band of loyal scouts, and we will lose many of our people in the process." Verliston shot a glance back at Elslin, without releasing Madge's hair from her tight fist. "I care not what the Dellblood elders do or say," she said, "for now I have something they lack." "And what is that?" Bliston said. "An indestructible weapon," she replied, a slow smile breaking upon her dark lips. "This weapon in my hands will all but guarantee our success." Even if that's true, Commander, what makes you think our people will go along with your plan? Added Bliston. They may not want war with the Dellbloods. They will, once they see this. With a movement so swift as to appear almost invisible, Verliston swept her blade and branch behind Madge's head. Freylin instinctively leapt to his feet and gasped, but Kaleb grabbed the edge of his shirt and yanked him back down behind the banister when he saw that Madge was unhurt by the stroke. Fortunately, no one below noticed Freylin's silent protest from the balcony. Madge wept hysterically. Looking up, she saw that Verliston was holding in a tight fist a patch of Madge's long blonde hair. The tall woman flung the hair onto the floor where it lay scattered in haphazard golden strands across the cobbled stone. Then, with another swift motion, Verliston pushed Madge's face downward roughly. She called her scouts over to inspect the Dellblood's bare neck. Even at a distance, Kaleb could see the outline of a black, stone-render mark at the base of Madge's naked neck. The scouts gasped. "Look what we have here," Verliston said. "A half-breed. No stone-render in the city will sleep well tonight, knowing that our people's ancient blood has mingled with Dellblood's." She grinned wickedly down at Madge. "I thought as much from the moment you were brought to me, you beautiful, pitiful girl. My eyes are well trained. Your dark eyes and that sharp edge along your jaw gave you away. You are no true Dellblood, and you are certainly no stone-render." Madge could not look up at them for shame. She sobbed where she sat as the stone-render scouts in the chamber grumbled to each other under their breath. Verliston interrupted them. "This woman will serve to remind our people that their way of life, that their very identity is now at stake, since the Dellbloods have fraternized with our people. I will bring her not to the city elders, but march her right into the city square, where all the stone-renders of Ablerin will see what she is. In short time, the citizens will give me power to fall upon the Dellbloods and wash out the memory of them from Parison forever." "But Verliston," said Bliston, as though struck with a thought, "the girl must have a stone-render in her lineage. Who would dare violate our customs and breed with a Dellblood?" "Who it is does not matter," she replied, turning suddenly toward Glista. "For we already have one traitor in our midst, one whom we can implicate both for fraternizing with the Dellblood herself and with these mangy forest beasts." Glista said nothing. She stood nobly between the two stern guards, her eyes fixed on Verliston. Without breaking eye contact with Glista, Verliston said, "Bliston, did you tell me you saw a Dellblood in my daughter's company yesterday?" "I did, Commander," said Bliston. "We found Glista traveling alongside that ugly beast we've got caged up over there, and there was a man with her, too, dressed in a Dellblood tunic. I think he was holding an axe, but he got away from us." Verliston went on staring into her daughter's eyes. Kaleb, squinting above them, now saw the clear resemblance between the two women. Their features were nearly identical. The sharp lines of their jaws, the lithe outline of their bodies, and yet they looked so different. Glista lacked her mother's haughty ramrod posture and the calloused, unflinching expression that beamed out of Verliston's eyes. Glista's black uniform was still covered in mud, and her long braided hair was disheveled. It appeared that Glista's sword had been confiscated, for its hilt could no longer be seen rising above the sheath on her back. "My one and only daughter," muttered Verliston to herself. "My daughter, found consorting in the forest with Dellblood men and beasts." Here the tall woman threw a disdainful look at the wolf and bear in their cages. Somehow I knew, she continued, that my efforts to make you a stone-render scout, the first female warrior among our people, was a colossal waste. Your heart was never with me, Glista." "What do you know of heart, Mother?" "I know that you broke mine," snapped Verliston back at her. Do you realize I sent every scout we could muster after you the morning you disappeared?" Glista said nothing. "But the truth is, I didn't need anyone to tell me where you had gone. I already knew. You had crept away to stake an alliance with our enemies." "These beasts are not your enemies," Glista said, "and neither are the Dellbloods you're plotting against. You see everyone in this land as an obstacle to your power, as something to trample on your way to building a throne in Ableron." Verliston turned her back to Glista and swallowed hard. Her voice grew grave and quiet. "Do you know, my daughter, the shame I had to bear the night I returned to the great stone to retrieve your infant body?" Glista again said nothing, but Kaleb could tell by the movement in the lines of her face that she was beginning to cry. "Mother, it was not my fault. Your father wanted to give you to the elders, but I would not let anyone, even the cruel forest spirit himself, take you from me." For the first time, Kaleb saw a familiar shame in Glista's face, something he recognized in his own reflection countless times before. Perhaps it had always been there, in her eyes and lips, but her graceful movements and commanding voice had disguised it, until now. "I should have ended your life and mine that night," Verliston muttered. "I have been loyal, Mother. Only our people come first." Verliston turned on her savagely. "Your people? Do you think because you were raised in privilege that these people belong to you, or you to them?" Glista winced and shook her head sorrowfully. Kaleb held his breath. "Bliston," said Verliston. "Yes." "Cut off my daughter's hair at the nape of her neck." "Are you sure?" "Do it," she ordered, keeping her back to Glista. The two guards on either side of Glista clasped her arms, holding her fast as Bliston drew his sword. Glista struggled against them without success. "Mother, please," she said. Bliston soon stood, sword extended toward Glista's head, just behind the prisoner. Verliston went on staring into the fire. "Do it," Verliston said. "Mother, please don't," Glista whimpered. "Now, Bliston." With a quick turn of his short blade, Bliston chopped off the bottom of Glista's straight black mane. He stepped back in surprise. "She's not marked," Bliston gasped. "What?" said Elslin, who ran over to where Bliston was standing. "The daughter of Verliston, our great commander, is an unmark?" he blurted out. Verliston turned to face her shorn daughter, and for the first time Kaleb heard something that sounded a little bit like compassion in her voice. "I hid it from the city elders for 2 decades, fashioned a story about her skin being sensitive to the sun. I convinced them that her hair must not be cut. I hoped that my unmarked daughter would one day thank me for delivering her from a life of exile." Glista lowered her head, her face flushed and tear-stained. "But alas," her mother continued, "I could not save her from the simple truth. She is a traitor and deserves exile, maybe worse." Glista lifted her head and looked at her mother directly. "There is nothing wrong with me, Mother," the scout girl said, straightening up between the powerful hands of Verliston's guards. "I am just as human, just as much a creature fashioned by the forest spirit as any other marked woman in Ableron." "And who told you that?" hissed Verliston. "I learned it from a prophet in Terrashine." The look in Glista's eyes as she stared down Verliston's made Kaleb want to weep. "Terrashine," answered Verliston. "What does our city have to do with those woods?" Glista did not respond. Her mother smiled. "I suspect that's where these filthy, 4-legged friends of yours have been hiding. Well, daughter, I assure you that when the stone renders spread into Glenward, my first order of business will be to level that forest to the ground and kill every last creature in it, as our ancestors should have done centuries ago." At this, Teva growled. Grimwit rattled the bars of his cage with a smack from his powerful paw. Bliston swiveled toward the cages in surprise, and Elslan drew his sword instinctively. Verliston, on the other hand, merely laughed at the beasts. "Do you think you're so frightening, you giant brutes?" scoffed Verliston. "Trapped in a cage crafted by the hands of men, are you here to retrieve the branch on behalf of your kind as well?" "I'm here to save Terrashine from the likes of you," growled the bear. A look of genuine shock came into Verliston's face. Kaleb wondered whether the beasts had yet spoken in the presence of the Stonerenders. By the startled expression on the scouts' faces, he guessed that they had not. Elslan's sword dropped out of his hand, and Bliston cursed at him to pick it up. Kaleb noticed Elslan's hand shaking at the sound of the bear's voice. Verliston took a cautious step toward the bear's cage. "So, the myths about animals having voices are true." Grimwit did not respond. "Does the wolf speak as well?" said Verliston, crouching in front of Teva's cell. When the wolf was silent, Verliston picked up a small stone chip on the floor and tossed it through the bars at Teva. Teva dodged the stone. It pinged off an iron bar in the back of the cage. Verliston laughed. "I must admit, you are a magnificent creature. Perhaps your kind will be permitted to survive the torching of Terrashine, only to serve as pets for the Stonerenders." "There are no more of my kind," Teva said. "What did you say, beast?" "My kind were slayed by your people many years ago in the woods between Ablerin and Glenward." Verliston searched the wolf's blue eyes. "We slayed your companions, you say? I can't believe the Stonerenders would do such a thing. You are mistaken." "I know your voice," Teva said. "What do you say?" "Your voice," Teva repeated. "I heard it the day my mother was slain in the woods." Verliston straightened up and smiled. "Perhaps I was wrong. Yes, my memory is clearer now. I remember that day. Several of your pack died at the edge of my own blade, as I recall." She took a step closer to Teva's cell. "And I remember that one of those wolves, perhaps a brother of yours, is now a rug in my dressing chamber." Teva snarled but remained motionless. Verliston leaned in closer to the cage and said, "If I did slaughter your family, you would seek revenge, wouldn't you? Yes, I can see that fierce look in your eyes. You would never be content as a slave." She glanced over at Grimwit. "And if anyone were to see you creatures before our campaign against Glenward, there would be thorny questions." With this, she crossed to the bear's cell and reached for the heavy latch on the cage door. "Which means there is no reason to keep you alive any longer." Grimwit took a few cautious steps back from the cage bars. "Commander, what are you doing?" shouted Elslan, clutching his sword hilt tightly. Verliston released the latch and swung the cage door open. A wicked smile appeared on her face. "Come and taste my new blade, beast," she said. The bear edged his way forward, glancing nervously at Teva as he did. The wolf was standing alert, her fur bristled up around her broad ears. "Do not trust her," said Teva under her breath to Grimwit. Verliston laughed. But just then a sharp curse was shouted by someone near the hearth. Glista had kicked one of the guards at her side. He was clutching his left leg in pain. Kaleb watched Glista twist the long sword out of his hand in one deft motion. Before the other guard could draw on her, Glista had her sword at his neck. He lifted his hands in surrender before she drew any blood from his throat. "Mother, I think I know what you mean to do with that sword," Glista shouted from across the chamber. "I cannot let that happen." Verliston smirked at her. "Let what happen, exactly?" Grimwit hesitated in the open door of his cage, his narrowed eyes fixed on Verliston's weapon. Glista said, I know you better than you realize, Mother. I've watched you pore over those tattered history books you paid a fortune to have stolen from the mystics in the north. You've been after an unstoppable power, some object or spell that would put Parasun under your grasp, for as long as I've been alive. And now I suspect you've found it. That blade will kill any man or beast who engages you in battle. A wrinkle came into Verlisden's smile. She glanced down at the sword and branch in her right hand. My dear, you have it all wrong. I did indeed scour this world for a power, but not the power to defeat my political rivals. I spent decades looking for a magical cure. A cure for what? Said Glista. For the one thing I could not give you, Verlisden said, facing her daughter. A magic that would restore to you the mark of our people. Glista's eyes glazed over a little at this. She stood clutching her hostage in silence. Verlisden, voice hardening a little, continued. And after decades of searching, I came up with nothing. There is no cure, no way to reverse the curse upon you, my daughter. Glista blinked and shook her head. Then why did you steal the branch? Verlisden raised the blade and flourished it through the air above her head. Then she said, Because, my stubborn child, those years of fruitless searching for a cure taught me that there is no hope in spells or prayers, no hope in anything but power. And nothing in this world carries more power than the magic of the forest spirit. Until this morning, that magic had been buried from time immemorial in his hands. Here Verlisden took a cautious step toward Glista and the guard under her arm. And what has he done with it, my girl? I will tell you. He has used it only to confuse, cower, and enslave our people on this hideous mountain. But in my hands that magic will liberate our people. We will reign over Parasun. And I will make sure we never have to beg from anyone in this world again. Glista said, It is against our people's rules to fight an unarmed opponent, Mother. You taught me that rule before I could walk. Will you now wield that enchanted blade against an unarmed creature? I see you have grown daring, Glista, but not very wise, said Verlisden. This creature before me is a dangerous beast with teeth and claws to defend himself, and I know nothing as of yet about this blade. I will only know if it is charmed, as I suspect, after I use it on something. Now stand back unless you mean to test my magic weapon against that borrowed sword in your hand. Glista gave the guard in her grip a powerful push. He fell to the stone floor. Then, sword still in hand, she eased her way over to Grimwit's cage, until she was positioned between the bear and her mother. I will die before you touch either of these creatures, said Glista. The tip of Verlisden's blade and branch dipped just a little. She looked curiously at her daughter. Let me be clear, Glista. You would kill me to save these beasts? Is that what you mean? Glista stretched out her blade toward her mother. Even from the balcony, Kaleb could see that her forearm was shaking. His stomach clenched up as he watched. I would do anything, Mother, to save my friends. And as you just made clear to these scouts, I have no right to call myself a Stonerender. If so, perhaps I am not truly your daughter either. So yes, I would kill you to protect these innocent creatures. Oh, my wayward girl, Verlisden muttered. My traitorous girl, you will not want to stand on the opposite side of the battle coming. But do as you wish. Raise your sword to me if that suits you, but since you have shown me no shred of loyalty, neither will I shield you from its magic. Its deadly magic. At this moment, Grimwit lunged forward from the cage with a loud roar. He rushed past Glista and toward Verlisden. Verlisden met his lunge with a swift, dodging motion, and using the blunt edge of her blade, she struck the bear against the broad side of his head as he passed her. To the surprise of everyone present, the massive bear was flung sideways like a rag. His body tumbled across the floor as though struck with the force of a tree trunk. Verlisden laughed at the sight. "So the branch makes my small sword capable of dispatching even a giant creature like this. I cannot wait to thrust it through his thick hide and finish the demonstration." Glista stood like a statue for a moment. Teva whimpered and retreated into her cell looking like a terrified puppy. Kaleb looked down at Grimwit, who was moaning in pain almost directly beneath him. The bear faltered as he tried to stand after the brutal stroke from Verlisden's enchanted weapon. Finally on his feet again, Grimwit staggered forward for 2 steps before he collapsed to the floor again, panting heavily. Kaleb suddenly realized with a pang of terror that a smaller creature, like Teva for instance, would die instantaneously at a stroke of Verlisden's magical blade. Verlisden took a triumphant step toward the bear, her sword raised above her head. But just then, rapid footsteps were heard in the passageway outside. A short scout appeared, huffing and puffing in the doorway, and blurted, "Verlisden, there's something above that you must see. A creature, a terrifying creature, soaring above the city. The people are quaking with fear, and the elders have been called to emergency council. They are asking for you." Verlisden lowered her blade. Curse this inconvenience. Then she barked at Bliston and Elslin. "I must go, kill the beast quickly, and take the filthy half-breed," here she gestured toward Madge, "to my quarters above ground, until I determine how best to make use of her." With that, Verlisden briskly followed the panting scout toward the chamber door, tucking her branch and sword beneath her long, flowing robes as she went. "But, Commander," shouted Elslin back at her, "what do you wish us to do with your daughter?" Verlisden turned in the doorway. For a moment she locked eyes with Glista's. Then she said in a flinty voice, "Haven't you heard the rumors, Elslin? My daughter died in the deep woods a week ago. This is only her ghost, and ghosts, like talking animals, are bad luck. Kill her too." Verlisden swung on the heels of her boots and disappeared into the dark passageway outside the chamber.